Hey everyone. Yeah, it's about 1:03 p.m. as I'm recording this on this Tuesday, October 7th, 2025. And yeah, there's a couple of videos that are before this audio videos that I recorded yesterday. I just didn't have a chance to upload them due to the fact that I guess when you have a charger, a charger cord, if you will, whether it's USB-A at the end or USB-C at the end, that basically it's going to have some issues, eventually, depending on how you move it around. And I have to basically maneuver my phone. My phone's fine, but the charger at times you have to just maneuver it around to get it to a certain position so it can charge fully, or else you also have to turn the phone off and just let it go like that. And I think that helps out too. But still, it's just one of those situations to where I've got plenty of USB-C cords, so I don't have to worry. It's just like, it becomes a nuisance. Also, I tried to record this just moments ago, and what happened is I ended up getting an Amazon delivery delivered to my door. Basically, it's something that Frank Hill sent me. He likes to send me and people like Zarin Isaac and David Bunch of Numbers and Patrick Butler. He likes to send us some movies or some items that we may or may not have and everything. And I'm certain right now that what he sent me I do not have, but I'm glad to be getting it and adding it to the collection. I'm also going to be doing some package openings tomorrow as well, mainly because I ordered a few things from Amazon last night due to the Prime Big Days, the Prime Days sales. Even though one of them doesn't say Prime Big Deal Sale, it's still a limited edition sale. It's a limited edition deal, and I'm just putting it under the category of it's a Prime Big Deal. They just haven't changed it to that just yet. So so that's coming tomorrow as well. Those packages are coming tomorrow as well. Three of them I will say are books. Two for a family member of mine who wants to read them, and it's by two people that they're supporting right now. Well, one of them, of course, tragically lost their life, and then the other is the VP of the country. But that's all I'm going to say. I think you all know who I'm talking about. And then the other one is a recent it's a recent, basically, I guess you could say, is it a commendum or commembrum or mumbrum, whatever they call it? It's basically a collection of a lot of classic comics of a certain franchise by a certain publisher back in the 80s. And that's all I'm going to say there. But the reason I want to come on here is last night, Monday Night Raw, had its go-home show to Crown Jewel Perth. The Crown Jewel this year is taking place in Perth, Australia, not in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, like it did last year. And, a lot of people have their opinions about these events. A lot of people feel like they're just filler events. Like, they have no real stake, they have no real meaning. But last night, in the eyes of a lot of folks, that kind of changed, as well as in the process, allowing WWE through Raw and potentially through SmackDown this Friday, to get back to what it's been known for, and that's storytelling, along with, accompanied by great wrestling, that kind of, aligns with that storytelling. And, when you kind of look at some of the segments on WWE's YouTube page, you definitely see what they're talking about. You definitely see that the storytelling is slowly creeping back in. Because when you look at some of the matches, like you have Seth against Cody, champion versus champion, to determine who will be this year's, Crown Jewel champion for the men. When you look at that, and the long history, but between them, the segments, surrounding that pretty much sold anybody that had doubts of seeing a fourth Seth Rollins Cody Rhodes match in Perth. It sold them on wanting to see it. Because right now, storyline wise, you have Seth Rollins in the situation to where he wants to prove that he is on the same level, if not beyond that same level, of a Cody Rhodes, of a Roman Reigns, of a CM Punk. He wants to prove he is basically the be-all, end-all, if you will. And that winning this crown jewel championship for the men and having bragging rights for a year, basically saying that the world champion is more superior than the WWE champion, and by default, the world championship, the world heavyweight championship, is more better than the WWE championship. For him, for him to get that opportunity, for him to have those rights for a year, along with his wife in story, Becky Lynch, basically basically going off of what everybody has said about her, including Sports Illustrated, that, oh, she's the greatest women's wrestler of all time, the GOAT, if you will. In story, imagine how much more egotistical that would make him and her. Basically, together proving that, hey, we're better than everybody else. And this company needs us more than we need them. Or more than we need it, if you will. So the story writes itself, because Paul Heyman basically said, look, you have to win this, because if not, then you're going to lose respect, not just from the Raw locker room, and probably the entire WWE locker room, Raw, SmackDown, NXT involved, Raw, SmackDown, NXT Evolve included, AAA by extension. He says, not only do you lose the respect of all of them, but you also lose the respect of the people that you've taken under your wing. You make them doubt whether or not joining with you was the right decision. Was the right decision. And also, you'll lose the respect of the man that's going to question whether or not he made the right choice, turning his back on the tribal chief. As well as his best friend in the world, that being Roman Reigns and CM Punk. You're going to make him question that. And he doesn't. And Paul Heyman basically makes it clear. He's like, look, I don't want to question that. I don't want to question myself on whether or not I made that right decision. I made the wrong decision. He says, you have to go out there and prove me right in my choice. You have to go out there and prove that your way, the way of the visionary, the way of the vision is the future, is best for the business of the future, best for the future of this business. He's basically telling him that this is, this is basically win or go home. That's essentially what he's telling Seth. And what you can see with Seth is he's cracking. He's kind of slowly cracking under the pressure of being the world champion. He's slowly cracking under trying to prove he's on the same echelon level as a Roman Reigns and a CM Punk and a Cody Rhodes. He's cracking under that pressure, and what it leads to in storyline, because in storytelling, as well as with the storyline, because he's one of the best to do it. What this leads to, eventually, is not only him probably snapping fully, basically going completely nutsoid, if you will, if he loses, and going on and allowing the Vision to go on a rampage and take everybody out because they don't want to accept him as, the be-all, end-all. But basically, what it does is it starts the process of him, believe it or not, redeeming himself by coming to the realization that even though he's good in the ring, probably one of the best, if not the best in the ring to do it, and basically that he's one of the best, if not the best overall packaged competitors and performers to ever do it in the modern era. But the redemption, when we get to that, is not only is he going to realize all that, but he's going to realize that maybe his spot in the business is as a top guy, but as a top utility guy, a guy that's called upon to do certain things, wear certain championships when the time is needed. That's what it's leading to. It's going to lead to him realizing, hey, I'm not going to be Roman Reigns. I'll never be him. I'll never be CM Punk. I'll never be Cody Rhodes. I'm just me. I'm just Seth Rollins, a.k.a. Tyler Black. I am just looked at as one of the best, if not the best, in-ring performer in this business. And I am looked at as probably the most dependable utility player any company could ask for. And that's it. That's it. He'll be looked at in that manner. He'll be looked at in that manner, which is why he basically, in story, by Paul Heyman's words, has to win on Saturday. He has to beat Cody Rhodes on Saturday. Thus, not only proving to the world that he is right in everything he says. That his way is the way of the future. His vision is the right path for the company. That people should come to him. They should ask. They should come to him and ask him for advice. Have him, guide them into the future and stuff like that. You know, Basically, him winning on Saturday validates everything he's talking about. It also validates the fact that the World Championship, this incarnation of the World Championship, is not looked at as a second tier title or a constellation title, as Roman Reigns once called it. It basically validates the World Championship as the top, championship that everybody's going to be after, that everybody wants. And that no matter who beats him for the championship after Crown Jewel, whether it's LA Knight, CM Punk, Jey Uso, you name it, that whoever beats him, basically by beating him and becoming world champion, it validates that person as the be all end all of WWE, in that position. And it basically allows Seth, even in defeat, to pass the baton, pass the torch to that person and say, now you're the be all end all. Now you're the man. Now you're the flagship of this company. Now you're the vision of this company. You're the one that's leading us into the future, or at least for the time being, lead us into the new year. That's what it does. That's what it does, and this is why people were praising the storytelling when it came to that, it came to those segments, or that one segment last night. They were praising that, and if they continue that on SmackDown in Perth, continue that narrative on SmackDown, it's going to be even better. Because basically, again, Seth winning validates everything he says. It puts, validation of the World Championship, basically saying that it's on the same level, if not better, than the WWE Undisputed title. And thus, again, as I said, whoever beats him for that championship, it puts them in that same category. It basically makes them better than whoever the WWE Undisputed Champion is. And that is how you tell a good story, because it has a domino effect at the end of the day. It has a domino effect, not just with whoever is in that position to win, in this champion versus champion match. Not only does it put stakes there, if you will, to basically try to validate everything Seth is saying, but the domino effect is it's going to help, it's going to enhance, and validate whoever beats him for that championship as them being the top guy in WWE, as them being the franchise player, them being the face, if you will. So this again is an example why people were glad to see the storytelling coming back. But that's not just the only story. You have this whole situation with Asuka, Kairi Sane, and Io Sky and Rhea Ripley. And Kairi basically stuck in the middle of this thing with Asuka and Io because basically, she's trying to create peace. She's trying to, get these two back on the same page, because to her basically, it's like, she and Io owe everything. It's basically, the story is, the story is it's about tradition when it comes to Kairi. Kairi is looking at the situation with Asuka and Io and herself, and she's telling Io, look, we owe everything. I mean, Io even said it herself in a way, and Kairi's just trying to validate it. Look, by basically saying, look, we owe everything to Asuka. If it wasn't for Asuka, you and I wouldn't be here, or you and I wouldn't even be in this business. So we owe everything to her. So in other words, what she's saying is, no matter whether we like it or we don't, if Asuka tells us to do something, we do it. If she tells me and you attack Rhea at Perth, me and you attack Rhea. End of story. If she tells me to attack you, I gotta attack you. It's about loyalty. It's about paying back what she did for us. And we all know that in story, it's leading to Kairi basically having enough and going after Asuka, maybe even going after Io, and basically saying that, she's had it with both of them, and that they're either going to get along, or she's going to beat it into them. They're either going to make peace, or she's going to beat it into them. That's what it's heading towards. Or it's heading towards basically a Sky Pirates, believe it or not, that was a team in NXT, a Sky Pirates reunion between her and Io Sky. That's potentially what it's leading towards. A reunion. To where now Asuka is going to be back on her own, and that might be beneficial for Asuka because she was always looked at as dominant, either as a heel or a face. She was always looked at as dominant. And to me, it's going to go one of those two ways. It's either a Sky Pirates reunion we're getting, or it's going to basically be, Kairi Sane having it up to here with both of them, and saying she's going to beat the living heck, she's going to beat, they either basically call the truth and have peace with each other, or she's going to beat it into them. She's going to beat them into making the truth and having peace with each other, or they're going to do it, naturally and honorably. I could see that happening, and that right there, believe it or not, is going to be a tremendous triple threat when it happens. I mean, you let these three, as some people would say, you let certain people go in that ring based on accompanied by a great story, and you're going to create magic. You let Asuka, Io, and Kairi go at it in a triple threat with each other, you're going to have magic. Whether you have it done on the 2025 finale, the final Raw of 2025, whether you have it on the final Saturday Night's Main Event along with John Cena's retirement in December, whenever you have it, even on the first Raw of 2026, whenever you have it, it's gonna blow the roof off because you have great storytelling, being accompanied by great wrestling, and that was the other thing people praised about last night's Raw, that it had great storytelling accompanied by great wrestling, and it's just great to see. It's just tremendous to see. But it's not just these two stories that I mentioned, the Seth thing, the Seth Cody thing, and now Kairi, Asuka, Io, and Rhea. No, it's not just that. You also have the Roman Reigns situation. His feud, if you will, with Bronson Reed and Braun Breaker. Mostly Bronson Reed right now. When it comes to Bronson kind of making it personal by stealing his stuff and dubbing himself the tribal thief and all that. You got that leading into potentially what's being considered the main event for Saturday in an Australian street fight. Who knows how crazy that's going to get by WWE standards. But then again, on the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, you also have this other storyline that's going on alongside that as well, to where people are guessing like, what is going on here, right? Because it looks like to some that Roman's trying to, he's trying to basically reform the bloodline, the OG bloodline, to be what it should have been in the get-go, or what it was in the get-go, and that's basically, take no prisoners, do whatever it takes to win. Basically do whatever it takes to win, take no prisoners. And for Jay to and there is a segment backstage with, Roman, Jay, and Jimmy, to where you see Jay basically, in a way, acknowledging to Roman, hey, now I understand. Now I understand why you acted the way you did, even though I didn't like it. Now I get it. He's basically saying, now I get it. I see that you were only doing what you had to do to win. You were only having us do what you made us do so you could succeed, so you could keep the championship in the family. I get it. I get it. So and then you have Jimmy, just like Kyrie, kind of stuck in the middle, but it seems that Jimmy's more willing to be like, you know what, family first. And if I have to side with Roman and Jay to get the job done, I will do it, even though he's not thrilled at the fact that it seems to him that Jay is slowly becoming another Roman Reigns, or at least, what Roman wanted him to be. And Roman's just telling him, look, man, you've got to do what you got to do for you to get back what you lost. So that's a great story, because you don't know if they're slowly turning Roman back to a manipulative heel like he was before, or it's just how he is, and he's just trying to, awaken the beast, awaken the animal, the Samoan savage, that's in Jey Uso, that's been locked away, that, Jay always refused to let out. He's trying to unleash that. and he's doing it in his own, I guess you could say, manipulative way and all that, but it's a way that basically fans are cool with because they're like, yeah, we want to see this Jey Uso. We want to see this Jimmy Uso. We want to see the Usos, the bloodline, as faces, but as they were before. Basically, doing whatever it takes, but doing it to people that now deserve it, or people that get in the way. Like, hey, no disrespect, but you're in my way. That's my title, no one else's. Or, hey, that's my opportunity, no one else's. So that's great to see. That's great to see from its own storyline perspective. And there are other stories as well. I mean, AJ Styles basically thanking the fans for making the match with John Cena in Perth happen. That's great storytelling because basically, WWE in their own way through AJ Styles and by extension John Cena are acknowledging, okay, we do hear you, we do listen to you, you want this match, you're going to get it, and there you go. Perfect ends to a mean. And AJ's even telling them, look, we don't really need a story to go out there and do what we love to do. What we're gonna do is we're gonna dance one more time, and we're gonna leave it all in that ring. He's basically saying, hey, get your flash bulbs ready, or excuse me, your flashes ready on your phones or whatever. Have your cameras ready to set to record, because basically you're going to see, it may not be the best match, but you're going to see something to where both men, when it's all said and done, are going to know that if this is indeed the last time they face each other, which it will be, because you have John leaving, at the end of the year, retiring. You have AJ basically potentially being gone and retiring at the beginning of the year or the middle of next year, or whatever the case might be. They're going to go out there and basically prove that even at their age, they can still go. They can still get it done. And that's kind of cool. It's kind of cool to see. And I like that. I really do. I really like that. I really do. So there's a lot of good storytelling going on here. I mean, you have the whole Becky Lynch thing. That's a story to where she's allowing this whole "I'm the greatest woman of all time" deal. Kind of get the best of her, let it go to her head. And now she's basically saying, I'm not going to go to Perth, they don't deserve me. But she's going to be forced to go anyway. We can already see that. But yeah, it's just one of those situations to where, somehow, someone, whether it's Paul Levesque, Triple H, if you will, or whoever, turned the switch on, basically turned the power back on, and it's like all the light bulbs went off in everybody's creative head, and they're like, oh yeah, we need to make sure these stories make sense and have a connection to what happens in the ring. Because that was the one complaint some people made. They said, yeah, you had the stories, but, they felt lackluster. Like the potential was there, but it felt lackluster. It felt like you were going down a cold path that you didn't want to go down. And now all of a sudden you're rising back up, and hopefully you can keep that going. And to me, we're heading into War Games next month in San Diego. That right there pretty much is a very pivotal scenario, pivotal match. Ever since it's come to the main roster several years ago, it's become a very pivotal match. Because that basically is the end of one chapter, one major chapter in the storybook, and then the beginning of the other the following Monday. Because whoever wins War Games for the men, from a storyline perspective, that affects, what happens Monday, and that affects what goes into the next year, into the final Raw of 2025, into the last Saturday night's main event of 2025, which is Cena's retirement show. It affects that. It affects what goes into, the first Raw of 2026. It affects what goes into the Royal Rumble at the end of the month in Riyadh. It does all of this. It does all of this because of the outcome. And if it's the faces that win, then whatever happens with the heels, that's going to be the outcome. That's going to be the after effect of how do they recover from this. If it's the heels winning, it's like, okay, how do the faces bounce back? How do they, redeem themselves, and so on. It's got a lot of good, it's got a lot of good, story, building next, I'm trying to find the right words, building next chapter storytelling that comes afterwards. It really does. And it all. And here's the thing, like I said, it all basically last night. Again, trying to find the right words to say. Last night may have been basically the kick in the butt that they needed. Or basically it wasn't just the kick in the butt they needed. I think that kick in the butt came when ESPN themselves basically had one of the writers say, "Yeah, your debut show with us, not so good. Hopefully you'll do better." And maybe that's the kick in the butt they needed, because you started to see a little bit more improvement, because now Paul Levesque, Bruce Pritchard, TKO, Nick Khan, all of them are realizing, oh, even our partners are criticizing us. Maybe we do need to pick up the slack. Maybe we do have to put effort in. And now you're seeing it. Now you're seeing it. And again, whatever happens at Crown Jewel, storyline-wise, builds into War Games at Survivor Series in San Diego, goes from there, and whatever happens after War Games, is going to have an immediate impact building into that next chapter of storytelling, starting with the Raw after, going into Saturday night's main event, Cena's retirement, if you will, as well as going into the last Raw of 2025, the first Raw of 2026, Royal Rumble, you name it. It's going to have a huge effect. And that's why a lot of people were praising the storytelling that happened last night, along with the good wrestling, because that is what's needed to sell you on certain events. That is what's needed. Now, I bring this up because basically the other company, if you will, the other company, AEW, seems to be lacking that. They seem to be lacking that, and the reason I say they seem to be lacking that is mainly because of the fact that, yeah, they have potentially some good stories, if they're given the right people to, get behind them and, write them and make them compelling. They have good stories, but at the end of the day, all Tony Khan is concerned about is in-ring. That's it. Now, yeah, this all goes back to when he talked about, when AEW started, that he wants to make it a legit sports league. He wants to make it legit again, that being pro wrestling. And thus, by, doing that, he wants to focus more on the in-ring aspect. And that's great. But over time, you can only do so much. You can only do so much before even those in your company are like, okay, why am I wrestling this person? What's the meaning for it? Or why am I in a street fight with this person? Or why am I, in this? Why am I in this match or that match? What's going on? What's the point? Or hey, I'm debuting with, I'm debuting or re-debuting with the company. And I'm happy to be back and everything. Or I'm happy to be here. But why are you sticking me in this big old fraction? It don't make sense. It's just one of those situations to where, basically, it's just one of those situations to where, even when you have the talent, and I'm sure even some of the people behind the scenes wondering what sense all this makes, that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign for you. It's not a good sign for your company. And when you have people, when you have fans, audience viewers, and from an attendance perspective and a viewership perspective, basically slowly going bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, bye bye, bye, dwindling away, that's not a good sign. That's not good. And when basically under this new Nielsen ratings panel thing, whatever they're doing, saying that, hey, you scored the lowest out of all wrestling, out of all programming, if you will, for for Wednesday night. When you have them say that, if you will, when you have them say that right there, that right there is not good. And when you're basically coming out, or not you, but when it's, I guess you could say reliable information coming out saying, oh, by the way, the streaming numbers are not known because they hide them. They don't want them to be known. That's another telltale sign to people that it's not good, but you're ashamed to admit it. You're ashamed to admit it, and that's not a good sign either. That's not a good sign either. So to me, it's like when you compare, both companies, it's night and day. Because even when they weren't, at that point that they got to last night, and hopefully they can keep it going, people still view WWE as the more complete package. Like, yeah, you got good wrestling, but you had some decent storytelling, to go along with it. You were able to understand why certain matches were happening on Raw, why certain matches were happening on NXT, SmackDown, Evolve, even AAA by extension. You were able to understand that. But here with AEW, it's more along the lines of, yeah, we have great stories, but we're more about the wrestling. It's like wrestling first, stories last. And again, it makes you wonder, why certain talent wants to leave. Because even if they're involved in some stories themselves, what sense does it make for them? If they're not going to have a pivotal part, or they're going to have a reason for it. One of the biggest complaints people have is that it seems that half the damn roster, male roster that is, half the damn male roster is, basically in the Don Callis family. It's like, you look at that Don Callis family, and you pretty much have the foundation to start your own promotion. Because that's basically what it is. It's its own promotion. It's its own organization. It's its own wrestling organization and promotion. Based on how many members are in there. And you gotta wonder if that's the story that if Don Callis is trying to, plan an in-house invasion, an in-house hostile takeover of the company. You gotta wonder if that's the story, then why not let it be known? Why not just come out and say, this is the story, or at least hint at it, and make people guess and wonder, is Don Callis trying to plan an in-house hostile takeover of the company? I wonder. Basically do something to get people intrigued to wonder that, because to me, if you do something like that, yeah, even though this whole Don Callis thing doesn't make sense by adding member after member after member, if you do something like that to where you get people wondering, I wonder, is this all about a hostile in-house takeover? It gets people more intrigued. Heck, it gets them more intrigued than what's going on, than the Death Riders and the Young Bucks before them, doing it, in the past. It gets them more intrigued because now you have the sizable group to make it happen. You have the entities needed to make that happen, to make that believable. You don't just have two individuals, flaunting their EVP or now former EVP powers, to get what they want. You don't have that. You don't have, a group of disgruntled, mostly disgruntled ex-WWE guys, with one exception in Wheeler Yuta. You don't have, a group of disgruntled ex-WWE stars in Moxley, Pac, Claudio, Marina Shafir, and the only exceptions being Wheeler Yuta and as recently Daniel Garcia. You don't have them just running around causing chaos and basically starting to send a message that obviously we now know what that message is by seeing what Daniel Garcia did in his match with Shibata. And that message is basically focus on the task at hand. Focus on your opponent. Basically block out any distractions. Focus on your opponent and win. That's it. And if that's the message, then why not just have John Moxley? Why not have him come out and say and basically point to Garcia, acknowledge him winning over Shibata, and telling everybody that the reason he won is because he blocked out all distractions. He focused on his opponent. And basically have Moxley say that, and come out and say that's the message. That just focus on your opponent and win. Don't let anybody distract you. Focus on your opponent and win, and prove that you are a champion without needing a title. If that's the message, then just come out and say it. Because if they do that, then everybody that's crapping on this storyline, this faction, and rightfully so, at least they could be like, oh, okay, now we get it. Now we know what his intentions are. His intentions are just to get people to focus on their opponent and win the match. And if that's the case, then I think, making that kind of thing a reality, making that the answer, even though people are sick and tired of this Death Riders thing, would be satisfactual. It'll be satisfactual at the end of the day. And I think everybody knows it. If they gave that kind of an answer. The thing is, you even have your world champion, Hangman Adam Page, directionless. I mean, what are you doing? Just having him defend the title against random opponents? I mean, yeah, the match against Samoa Joe is going to be great, But what are you going to do? You're going to have Samoa Joe beat him, and Samoa Joe's going to be a double champion? And then what? He's going to turn on the ops and be like, I don't need anybody now. I'm the champ again. I'll take on anybody. And let him go on another dominant run? Okay, fine. But where does that lead Adam Page? You're just going to put him in catering? You're going to say, okay, Adam Page, we did what we could with you. Now down the Ring of Honor. Is that what you're going to do? It's like, what sense does this make besides, oh, the story is Adam Page hasn't beaten Samoa Joe, so he's got to win here. Again, you need to make sense of the situation. You need to make sense of it. And look, I get the fact there's a lot of people that came from WWE, they never went to WWE, they came from TNA, they came from CMLL, New Japan, and all that. I understand, as well as the MLW and so on, I understand that the main priority is they just want to wrestle. They just want to go out there and wrestle, and if you put them in a storyline, that's great, but they just want to wrestle. They want to prove they're the best. I get that. But if you're going to be in wrestling and you just want to wrestle, and I say it with all due respect, no offense, there is the new real American freestyle. You could do storytelling, but you could also primarily wrestle. That right there, in my opinion, is your destination if you just want to wrestle. If you just want to wrestle and you don't want to deal with that, then there's amateur wrestling, professional amateur wrestling. Get into that. And guess what? That would be perfect for you if you just want to wrestle. If you just want to wrestle and that's it. Because when you get into the wrestling business as a whole, you make that your life, if you will. And I'm saying this as a fan, but when you get into the wrestling business as a whole, and you make it your life career, and your main goal, is to get to one of the top 4 companies, top 5 companies in the world, if not the top company in the world, then you better be prepared to not only show what you can do in the ring as a professional wrestler, but you better be prepared to tell great stories. You better be ready for that. Because if you don't have that, then you might as well not be in the wrestling business at all. You might as well not be in the wrestling business at all if you're not going to be prepared for that. And then if you're a fan and you just want great wrestling, and I say it with all due respect, no offense, then maybe you should be supporting real American freestyle or professional amateur wrestling, Olympic wrestling instead. Because wrestling is more than just what happens in the ring. Wrestling is about the storytelling, and about basically explaining why certain things are happening and why this match, that basically accompanies it, is happening. That is what wrestling, real professional wrestling, sports entertainment is about. And that's why when you look at All Elite Wrestling, a lot of people in that company are disgruntled. They may not come out and say it, but you could see it on their faces when they come out on camera and do a promo, or they go in that ring and compete. I mean, one person, believe it or not, that feels like he doesn't want to be there anymore, and he's an EVP, is Kenny Omega. And why? Because his body's breaking down, but he still wants to compete. He still wants to compete in the ring, but yet his body's breaking down. And thus he has this look like he doesn't want to be there because he knows the guy that he has to answer to doesn't care about, oh, I'll give you a light schedule and everything, and, you could do this, you could do that, and everything. And he is doing what he wants. Don't get me wrong. He is doing what he wants. But the point is, it feels like, it feels like when you look at him, that he knows that this guy's not giving him the proper time to heal, to get better. That just when it looks like he could be, halfway there to 50% ready to go, but not ready yet. Or 50% healed, but not ready to go. And stuff like that. 50% rehabilitated, 50% healed. Just when it looks like he's taking that next step to being fully there and everything and needing more time, what happens? He gets a phone call from Tony Khan saying, hey, Kenny, need you in the ring tonight. Thank you, bye. That doesn't help Kenny Omega. That doesn't help anybody else that has injuries. But it happens because this guy doesn't understand You're going to keep your top stars, on the air and part of pivotal angles, storylines, whatever you call them, for your company, then you need to let them properly heal. You need to let them properly heal from whatever they're going through. Okay? You need for them to properly heal from whatever they're going through. And that's it. That's it. You need to allow them to properly heal. But you're not letting that happen. You're not letting that happen. Because you're constantly calling upon them to compete. Which is why people like JD from NY206, Jason Solomon, Greg Morgan, Good Micro, Alex Hicks, everybody that I follow, even those that support AEW very strongly, are saying that Kenny has this look like he doesn't want to be there anymore. Because he's not being given the opportunity to heal properly. He's not. Now, some might say that, I bring up Kenny Omega, and earlier I brought up the Don Callis family. Some might say, well, what if this whole thing is nothing more than a ruse, and it turns out Kenny Omega is, with the family, and all this whole situation was to get him to have his own NWO-like faction to take over. Well, if that's the case, then fine. That would make a great story. That'd be the start of a great storyline to where Kenny wants to remind people, hey, I'm running the show, me and the Bucks run this show, and thus you do what we want. That'd be a great storyline. That'd be a great storyline, but, we haven't seen any hints or clues to that yet. We haven't seen any, wrestlers doubting whether or not Kenny is, on the up and up, or he's actually still with Don Callis. We've never seen any of that. If they would do that, it would make sense. It would make sense. Throw little hints out there, here and there. It would make things compelling. Just like I mentioned earlier with the Callis family. If you're basically bringing that together like its own wrestling promotion, promotion organization, if you will, then hinting at, hey, they're going to attempt to do a hostile they're going to attempt to do an in-house hostile takeover. That makes sense. Putting the little hints and wonderings and speculation out there, that makes sense, because guess what? It'll get people's attention to make them wonder if that's actually going to happen, or Tony Khan's just putting certain talent, men and women, into this group because he has nothing else for them to do. I mean, you get Andrade back, who becomes the first wrestler, sports entertainer, to go from WWE to AEW to AEW to go from WWE to AEW, back to WWE and now back to AEW. He becomes the first wrestler to do that, so he's got that under his hat. But yet, what do? Yeah, you have him attack Kenny Omega, and that's going to lead to a great match at Wrestle Dream, there's no doubt. But what do? Instead of just making that its own individual thing, you stick him in the Don Callis family. And to me, it's like, and to me, at the end of the day, if this is mainly still about Don Callis against Kenny Omega, then make it make sense. Make it make sense, okay? Have Don Callis basically say he's not going to stop making Kenny Omega's life a living hell until Kenny comes back to him, or Kenny, basically takes him back. And again, where would that lead the family? My thought is, well, if it's the latter, Don Callis wanting Kenny to take him back, the family disbands, because now Don doesn't need them anymore, because he's got back what he wants. He got back his cleaner, his superstar, his god of wrestling, if you will. But they're not even coming out and saying that. They're not even coming out and saying that, or at least alluding to the fact that that's what this is really about. Because, again, it feels like Tony Khan is spinning his wheels. He's spinning his wheels. I mean, you have Kyle Fletcher of the Don Callis family put Kenny Omega out, and instead of Kenny coming back and going after him, they just put him in a random tag. And then they have him feud now with Andrade. It's like, what? It's like, really? It's like, what's going on? What sense does that make? Yeah, it connects back to the Don Callis family, but what is this? A gauntlet? Kenny Omega's got to go through certain talent before he gets to Kyle? It doesn't make any sense. And then you got Mark Briscoe, who beat MJF in a tables and tax match, at All Out, beat a former world champion, the longest reigning AEW world champion, a guy that still has his contract to, cash in basically 7 days before, or basically a week before, or basically has to give a week's notice, is what I'm saying, before he does it. You have Mark Briscoe beating him, and yet instead of saying, "Hey, let's make," instead of doing Samoa, that basically instead of doing Briscoe and Page at Wrestle Dream, instead you have Briscoe against Kyle Fletcher potentially for the TNT title, and instead you have Joe against Page. It doesn't make. I agree. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, yeah, Briscoe's got a beef with Kyle, but what does that do for Briscoe besides basically allow him to put over Kyle? It doesn't do him any good. Unless you're going to inject MJF into it, and MJF is going to cost him the match, and it'll still, and thus in the end, it still makes him look strong, but, it took Kyle Fletcher getting the, help of Maxwell to make it happen. But again, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. You know what I'm saying? And then speaking of Maxwell, we know he's off doing a movie right now, and that's great. Congratulations to him. And, it makes you wonder why Tony ain't pushing this guy to the top, knowing that he, unlike certain other people, that go to that basically migrate to Hollywood, migrate into the movie business from wrestling, it basically, he still wants to be there, he still wants to compete, but it makes you wonder why Tony Khan's not pushing him, why he's not putting him at the top, at the echelon top of of AEW, making him the world champ again. It makes you wonder. It makes you wonder, because again, from a storyline aspect, he should be the world champion, or at least he should be basically, hinting at the fact that he's plotting and planning to cash in. When and where, again, that's up in the air, because right now, Tony Khan is in story hogtied, legitimately, and I guess in story hogtied, the stipulation that made it great. You never knew when somebody was going to come out, sign the contract, and then cash in and try to become world champion. You basically took that, that surprise factor away, because what? You just want, you want to promote the match because WBD, TBS, and TNT don't like the fact, HBO Max don't like the fact that you're just spontaneously, allowing cash-ins to happen. You know what I think about that excuse? Or, about WBD, TNT, TBS, and HBO Max not being happy with the spontaneity of the cash-ins. You know what I think about that excuse? I think that's a bunch of BS. I do. I think that's BS, honestly. And if I'm going to be truthful with you, I think Tony Khan was just looking for a reason, for an excuse to kind of change it, because he wants to, preserve the sport of professional wrestling and everything. And it's like, and it's like, are you serious? So you're going to sacrifice one thing that makes, anything, you're going to take the one thing that makes things interesting in any promotion away. You're going to take away that one gimmick that people are cool with, that people like. You're going to take that away because you want to preserve professional wrestling. Again, what sense does that make? What sense does that make unless you don't really understand the ins and outs of what a cash-in is? You don't understand the ins and outs. It's like it doesn't make any sense. And you know what's crazy? And I was thinking about this the other day. In fact, I was even thinking about it when I was working, at the place I went to seasonally for the past couple of years. They have a great story to tell with MJF against AEW and Tony Khan. And we're not just talking holding people up for money and all that like previously. No. We're talking a storyline that even though it might involve a lawyer and a lawsuit, it's great. It's great. It's right at their fingertips. It's right at their fingertips, ladies and gentlemen. And that storyline is MJF suing the company, for basically neglecting on their deal. That's what it is. Neglecting, and breaching the contract that clearly states that the winner could cash in at any time. That's a storyline right there. That's a storyline right there to where you could have MJF come out with his lawyers, legitimate lawyers or not, depending. You can have him come out and say, I'm going to hold every show and pay-per-view hostage from here on out, there will be no AEW unless Tony Khan changes his mind and allows me and anybody else in the future to cash in our championship shots when and where we want to, and not when he says. To me, that is a great story just waiting to be told. And if they can execute that, not only would Tony Khan by default have to, it basically, relent and say, okay, fine, I abolish that ruling. You can now cash in whatever you want. Basically admit defeat. But it shows basically that Tony Khan, in story and reality, doesn't fully understand the context of cash-ins when it comes to professional wrestling. To me, again, you have a storyline there that makes sense and it makes things compelling. Even though it may not interest some people, it's going to interest a lot more than we think. Because people are going to tune in and wonder, okay, how long is MJF going to hold the show hostage? How is he, when is he going to hold the show hostage? How long is he going to do this until he gets what he wants? And so on. It makes people want to tune in and watch. But are we going to get that? I don't know. That's up to Tony Khan to want to agree to. It's up to Tony Khan to want to agree to when it comes to Maxwell J. Freeman. It's going to make him. It's up to him. Because I know MJF. I know as a fan watching MJF, and I've watched him, believe it or not, when he was in MLW. But when I look at MJF, I know that he's the kind of person that would love to sink his teeth into something like that because it's in his character. It's in his character, on screen and legitimately. It's in his character. It would be perfect. It would be the perfect storyline to basically abolish this ridiculous idea of, hey, you got to give, a heads up a week in advance. No. You don't have to do that. Instead, you need to basically get rid of that and focus on the spontaneity. Basically, do we know when and where it's going to happen? And basically, by having Maxwell be part of something like this, that would be perfect. That would be perfect because, again, you put an end to that ridiculous stipulation and you basically, make Tony Khan humble himself and make him realize on screen, in story, and reality, you make him realize that he still has a lot to learn. But that's up to him because right now, it doesn't feel like we're going to get that just yet. But with MJF gone right now filming, that's the perfect excuse storyline-wise to say that he's not out filming a movie. He's actually getting himself healed up from the tax that was in his body. But also, he's working with his lawyers to get this stipulation of, you got to give the champion a week in advance notice before you cash in. It gives him time in story to get his lawyers to abolish that. Or else he's going to sue Tony Khan and All Elite Wrestling for everything. Or he'll hold all the shows hostage until he gets what he wants. Again, it's in his character, on screen and legitimately. But I don't know if we're going to get it the way this company is going in the eyes of a lot of folks. I know that JD from NY206 off the script, I know the Solid Monster, I know Alex Hicks, I know Greg Morgan, A&B Convos. I know all of them that I follow would agree that that would be the best kind of storyline. Even though we've kind of seen it done before, in the past. But, it still works. It still works, especially when you put certain people, you insert certain people into it. I know they would agree that that would make things a lot more interesting. I know they would. But again, we'll have to see with this company. We'll have to see what happens tonight on Title Tuesday at Homecoming in Jacksonville at Daly's place, if you will. We'll have to see there. We'll have to see what they do. But they're going to have stiff competition because tonight they're going up against NXT TNA Showdown, and that's going to probably get more eyeballs than them, unfortunately. But yeah, I just wanted to come on here and basically talk about the fact that, despite the fact that before last night they weren't doing so well and everything, still a lot of fans enjoyed what they were doing more so than the competition. Basically, storytelling in professional wrestling, sports entertainment, that's key. That's the key to success, along with the in-ring competition that accompanies it. It's key to success, and that's why WWE is getting the praise they did from last night, why they got a little bit of praise the week before, and so on, because they're starting to get back to that. Because, one, that criticism they got with their first show on ESPN's app or streaming services, that criticism they got, to me, was the kick in the pants they needed, because now they're realizing it's not just fans and all that, online critics and all that that are, saying what they're saying. It's now some of their actual partners, and they don't need that. They don't need that kind of a bad look. Basically, basically hurting them, if you know what I mean. But yeah, basically the difference between AEW and WWE, the storytelling. That's what it is. And right now, WWE is doing that a lot better than AEW ever could. AEW used to do it a lot better too, but they've lost the way. They've lost the way. But let me know what your thoughts are, guys. Comment down below, like the video, ring the bell for notifications, subscribe to the channel, also share the video, and click on the links in the description to find my content elsewhere outside of YouTube, as well as click on the top link to go to my new Fourth Wall store. I only have one thing up there right now, but there will be more. Trust me, I am going to make that happen. But go to my Fourth Wall store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else, as well as the OG Teespring store. The link is at the bottom there for merchandise you can't get anywhere else as well. It would greatly help me out, guys, especially during this time of change, since I lost my job on Friday. It'd be greatly appreciated if you could do that, as well as go to my Patreon as well. I'm going to plan something out there. I think I know what to do there going forward in the near future. But guys, that's all I'm going to say for now. Let me know what your thoughts are. Do you agree with what I've had to say? And until then, I'm going to get in the shower, and that's all I'm going to say. So until then, God bless. Take care.